Early Baroque period revolved around the transition from Renaissance style music to Baroque style music. In this early Baroque period, a new art form called opera was introduced. Opera is a drama performance where the actors sang their lines and were accompanied by an orchestra. The composers in the early Baroque period were trying to get away from the complexity of late Renaissance polyphonic texture. To do this, they veered towards creating more harmonies and music with homophonic textures. Homophony is a texture where parts of a movement mainly follow the same rhythm. Composers began to incorporate more figured bass, also called thorough bass. Figured bass is a shorthand system for indicating the harmonies that occur above a given bass note or string of bass notes. Additionally, in the early Baroque period, tritone was introduced. Composers used tritones to create dissonance since it created an unsettling or unstable sound due to it being an interval of 3 whole steps. Moving on, Claudio Monteverdi, an Italian composer, developed 2 new styles of music composition, being prima pratica and basso continuo. With basso continuo, a small group of musicians would play the bass line and chords that formed the accompaniment for a melody. Prima pratica was developed based on the heritage of Renaissance polyphony.
During the Baroque era, dozens of composers emerged. These composers came from different countries and different backgrounds, but all had one thing in common. Their musical styles were all distinctly Baroque. 3 eminent composers of this time included Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi. All of these composers had significant contributions to the Baroque era and all composed great pieces of music, many of which are still played today. Now we'll take a more in-depth look at each of these composers. Alright, first up on our list is Johann Sebastian Bach. From an early age, Bach was exposed to music by his family. For instance, he was given valuable instruction on the clavichord by his eldest brother. As an adult, Bach's musical talents were widely recognized, and he received many music-related job opportunities, such as being an organist or a court musician. Bach's most renowned compositions include pieces such as the Brandenburg Concertos, the Well-Tempered Clavier, and the Orchestral Suites, BWV 1066 through 1069, to name a few. Bach's musical style was very unique. His music was characterized by a frequent use of modulation, or key change, an extensive use of counterpoint, or the combination of different melodic lines, and elaborate ornamentation. Aside from being a composer, Bach was also a celebrated organist.
The Middle Baroque period lasted from 1630 to 1700. At this time, Baroque painting, architecture, music, literature, and fashion were fancy and highly embellished. Music of the Baroque period was primarily composed and performed for 3 cultural institutions: the church, the opera house, and the courts of the nobility. During the Baroque era, the church was the primary outlet for serious music in Europe. Church music, otherwise known as sacred music, was written primarily for organs, voice, or a combination of the two. The use of other instruments in the church grew throughout the Baroque period, beginning with brass music of Andreas and Giovanni Gabrieli, and continuing with the inclusion of strings and winds in cantatas and oratorios. These are music dramas based on religious subjects. The Gabriela's music was particularly unique because it was antiphonal, meaning that they placed different groups of brass instruments in various parts of the church to create an unusual musical experience.
Between 1680 and 1750, some of the characteristics during this time were a steady driving beat, long melodic lines, and dense textures. During the period, composers experimented with finding a fuller sound for each instrumental part, made changes in musical notation, and developed new instrumental playing techniques. Key composers of the Baroque era include Johann Sebastian Bach, Antonio Vivaldi, George Frederick Handel, and others. Famous pieces that come from this time period include Bach Cello Suites, Vivaldi Four Seasons, Canon in D major by Johann Bach, and more. The styles include overture, allemande, cront, sarabande, and gigue. Overture, the Baroque suite often began with the French overture, a slow movement followed by a succession of different dances of different types, usually followed by four. Allemande is often the first dance, and it's a very popular song that had its origins in the German Renaissance era. The allemande was played at a moderate tempo and could start at any beat of the bar. Cadence is the second dance, a lively French dance in triple meter. The sarabande is a Spanish dance. It's the third of the four basic dances and is the slowest one. The gigue is an upbeat and lively Baroque dance in compound meter, typically the last movement of the instrumental suite.
Some characteristics of Baroque music include long flowing melodic lines with ornamentation, sudden changes in volume, and much more instrumentation than before. Popular forms during the Baroque time period include dance suites, the sonata, and the prelude and fugue. Dance suites usually consisted of 5 different movements, but were not meant for dancers. Instead, they were meant for listening. 2 notable suite composers were Bach and Handel. Bach also wrote many sonatas, some of which were trio sonatas. Trio sonatas were one of the most popular forms of music in the Baroque era and consisted of 2 melodic lines and a basso continuo accompaniment played by the cello. The prelude and fugue was another favorite form of the Baroque era. It consists of 2 movements in the same key and is played by solo piano. Bach's famous The Well-Tempered Clavier includes many examples of different preludes and fugues. Now, please enjoy Bach's Prelude and Fugue No. 9 in E major and see if you can hear any of the characteristics of Baroque music that we just talked about.